Hey everybody. So today I figured I would do something different, and I'm just gonna do an analysis of Disney's Pinocchio. It is a it's a movie I've seen a few times, and I really it's an interesting movie that Walt Disney was involved with, and it has a lot of themes that I feel speak and resonate even to an adult audience. So we start off. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to make a movie commentary. You're not going to hear the audio or see the visual, but it's just going to be me commenting, giving a movie commentary. So we start off with a nice intro, and this movie. I think one of the things that really stands out to me is just how every frame counts. They really every single scene is set up with intent. Now we start off with Jiminy Cricket singing a very sentimental song. Like I actually think it's a beautiful song. Okay, so and the lyrics. When you wish upon a star, I don't know. It starts off with a nice. It starts off very slow, and I really think they're trying to get you to feel really sentimental. Like this is going to be kind of a story that touches your heartstring, and I think it does. It does a good job of doing that. The song, it's an amazing song. When You Wish Upon a Star, a great song. Now it starts off. You can see that it starts off with this takes place in Italy, right, with Geppetto and Pinocchio, and we see the Swiss Alps, which are the big mountains. And Walt himself, he had an interesting encounter where where he went to the Swiss Alps, and it really inspired him. And this may have inspired this movie for him. So it's fitting that it shows in a movie. Now, in the beginning, we see I loved one of the special effect right now they just did with Jiminy Cricket hopping towards the house, which is awesome. And now he's underneath the door. He walks around. This kind of intro where Jiminy is explaining how where he's narrating. Basically he's a narrator, but he's also a main character. So he's basically telling the story of what he went through and the time when dreams came true. And as we're about to see, they can come true, but they come with so much uncertainty and adventure. And the message of the story is perhaps that is how it happens. That oftentimes that's how it goes down and how it comes to pass. Now we see Pinocchio, and it's very, when you look at the visuals of this movie, I really enjoy the angles. They really approach it like from below, from up top, and the characters themselves, they're all very prominent. So Geppetto, Pinocchio, Figaro the cat, Cleo the fish, they all get a lot of screen time. So you really get to know them, and there are so many. This is the kind of movie that I think, unlike animation of today, perhaps every single frame is hand painted, hand drawn, and there is always something interesting happening in every shot, every single frame. Like, you need to pay attention, and the way they move, it's almost, to me at least, it is. There are so many iconic scenes. Just every scene is almost like a special moment in and of itself. I don't know how else to describe it, and that's the power of animation. That's what animation does. Like, that's different from if Walt Disney had made this a live action movie. And another thing too I notice is, well, you'll notice this more later on, but the style, obviously it's an older style of animation. So it's not it feels different than how we would do animation today. Now, a great scene is the music. So we're starting off with the music, and this first song, that he plays with the little his little trinkets. So Geppetto has a lot. He's an inventor. He's a creator. He has created a beautiful world. So obviously he is an intelligent man, and he is an accomplished man. So he knows what it takes to do great things, right? He understands the problems that are in life, but he also understands how to overcome them. And even though the story doesn't tell us that explicitly, we can see it is showing us the fruits of his labor. And so all of the things that he has created, presumably he's made them, right? He made the puppet. So he's made these beautiful machineries, these automatons that move. And then we can see Jiminy Cricket moving. He's trying to. Yeah, I think it's interesting how at the beginning he's hiding out, and there's the visual effect of Pinocchio walking through the water as Geppetto is introducing Pinocchio to Cleo, the fish. A beautiful effect. Like so many moments like that in this movie where they show, and I really like this one as well. So here's Pinocchio petting the cat, Figaro. And what they're really doing, the animators are kind of playing with Pinocchio himself and showcasing what a puppet can do. So what is he? What is Pinocchio? Pinocchio, he's a puppet. So let's show all the features. He can crawl, he can move, his leg moves and twists in ways that a normal human appendage would not move. So now, so it's really, this is a scene, this beginning scene really shows, it introduces each character, introduces the powers of Pinocchio, and it's interesting to see how they're showing the personalities of each ones in terms of okay, so now we're seeing all of the clocks, the clockwork, the music. I really like the music. I like how the music itself it sounds almost like it's kind of like it's being made by the clocks themselves, but it's not, and so that's just a design of a great decision in making the music. Now here we see Geppetto. It's just a scene that establishes each of the characters, and a lot of it, what I think is interesting is how we're not going to get to see moments like this anymore, because like this first scene is so important in creating they have to front end all of the interactions at the beginning, because later on it's going to be there's going to be more adventure, and they're not going to really have time to interact as much in the same way, and so we need to see them in their comfort. Now, another thing that's interesting is all of the different ways in which they have Jiminy Cricket laying on the violin, it looks like, and how there's so many interesting ways that they found to make the cat, for example, or the fish, or Jiminy Cricket, and give them spaces so that they can feel, so that they fit into the world. And so they'll give Jiminy Cricket a little cove, they'll specifically design it so that they do funny little gags, because they really are, it's funny, but it shows you how thoughtful they are and how they thought about every single scene and how to make every character fit. So Figaro gets his own little bed. And Jiminy, as we'll see, is going to get so many different versions. The way that he uses small objects is comical, but it's also intended. It's something that the animators really went out of their way to focus on. And here we're seeing Figaro opening the window, and we see the wishing star, which this shows you. It might seem weird, right? Like we think, like, who wishes upon a star, right? But this kind of shows the innocence of Geppetto, right? It's telling you that Geppetto there's an innocence to him, because he really does believe in doing the right thing, and the reason why is because it's brought him success, and it's telling you that he has a good heart, and that's what they're trying to establish, because like, what adult has that level of optimism? Right? Most adults are a little more cynical. They're not quite as positive or believing in the power of positivity. And his calm demeanor, that's really what the story is trying to tell. Now, this is a funny scene where Jiminy Cricket, and this is the kind of thing that you can only do in animation, right? So, we see the clocks, and we see Jiminy's eyes following the, what are those things called? I don't know what they're called. The things that swing around. I know there's a name for them. But like, there's funny little. This is a funny little cartoon thing. And once again, it shows you the power of animation. And then here we're about to see a kind of a funny scene, what I call, they're kind of like Bugs Bunny scenes, because Bugs Bunny was a TV show where they would do these kinds of gags all the time, where they would stop things in time and do things that are not logical, right? So here we see Jiminy Cricket just yelling, okay, wanting everything to be quiet, and then everything just stops, just in a way that is not realistic, of course, but this is the power of animation. But and I kind of wish that more of that would happen. And this movie really has so many moments like that, which you can only do in animation, and was popular back then in these older style animations. So now we're seeing the Blue Fairy, and the Blue Fairy is not just angelic and authoritative. You really, well, not maybe not authoritative, but powerful. Certainly, powerful would be perhaps the right word, and wise. And to see, so now she gives Pinocchio the gift of life, and I really like how the Blue Fairy, the way she's animated, she's almost animated slightly differently. Like, she's moved very slowly, and I don't know, she looks different, right? The Blue Fairy looks different from the others, doesn't move as quickly, but again, it shows the wisdom and it makes a distinction, right? She's not moving as quickly as the other characters are, and of course speaks in a way that is more, in a way that has elegance, a level of elegance. Like, she's almost like slightly poetic. And then here we have Jiminy, and he is Jiminy is interrupting, right? And he's talking about his conscience, and we're gonna, where he's a man of wisdom as well. Like, Jiminy is wise as well, because you can see that he has a lot to say about issues. And we're going to see this later on as well in the movies. And so the Blue Fairy recognizes this. And now what I think is interesting is, seeing so Jiminy right now, he's dressed in like a kind of tattered clothing. And I haven't quite figured out the symbolism behind, like, okay, so now he's getting the new clothing, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I probably should have thought about this, but I have not. I don't know the symbolism behind that, but I guess this is a special moment for him as well. So maybe this is his first time doing something like this, and so maybe that's what this commemorates. That's why he's getting his new suit, maybe. And of course, let your conscience be your guide. And the Blue Fairy, the personification, but not just personification, but in this case, the literal vision of hope and life and hope in difficult times. So now we're seeing Jiminy trying to explain to Pinocchio, and Pinocchio, talking about temptations, and I don't quite think Pinocchio quite understands what he's saying, but maybe it's because, Jiminy, what this is showing is really Jiminy, he's talking over him and not quite understanding how to get to him, right? How to talk to Pinocchio. And in this case, the animators are really storytellers. They're trying to show that Jiminy is new at this. And so that's why he's struggling. So he's, but he's trying, he's learning too. They're both learning. They're both going on this journey together. Now, this is the whistle song, and by the way, the voice of Jiminy Cricket, his voice is great. It just, the When You Wish Upon a Star, I can't imagine another voice. Like, his voice is amazing. He has this, he talks, his voice is great, and when he talks like somebody who is stylish. I mean, it matches his clothing, it matches his style, but it also has an air of wisdom. He doesn't come off as a young person. He comes off as an older person who has had experience. So very well cast. and we see him. And as we'll see him often, one of the things that's great about Jiminy is that he's able to interact with the smaller objects, and so it makes sense that the story has characters or gives him opportunities to interact with small objects. And then here's Pinocchio falling, and there's Geppetto waking up. So, okay, Geppetto lights up the candle, and these moments where we see the characters. I always think it's interesting how the animators they put so much attention into putting everything, the sound, the animation, the sound effects, all of it, they work in concert with each other. And every it always surprises you. That's the other thing. They don't overdo it on any one thing. When it comes to whether it's the visual or the sound, they put them just at the right moments. So at the right moments, they'll do the loud sound effect or something that sort of allows for things to happen in a way that surprises you, and also shows a high level of planning on the part of these storytellers and the animators who are working together to make this film. So now here's Geppetto. He just got water. He just poured water on himself, and he's incredulous, right? Like, obviously, on the one hand, it's weird how it's scary, because on the one hand, he takes it seriously, but then, when he really is concerned when Pinocchio starts making noise, but then afterwards, now we see him sort of believing it, and it shows you how this story, as cartoonish as it is, there is a level of realism attached to it that takes it, and it's designed to make you feel that these are moments where you feel like this is real, almost like there are real things at stake here. And that's I love how this movie does that, even though it's a cartoon movie. Okay, so now we see Geppetto's song, and he's turning on he has turned on all of his automatons, his music boxes, and Geppetto, Geppetto has these funny little gags, I guess, little moments that they give him with certain characters, right? And here we see Pinocchio again, the animators, playing around with Cleo and his swirling hands, and the animators are constantly showing interesting things that so every the animators really take the opportunity. Okay, see, here's another example where everyone's frantically trying to get water, and the animators, they do such a good job of just adding small little touches almost in every single frame. I mean, this is the kind of movie that you need to see every single frame to see all the gags, because you just miss out on so many of it when you don't. If you just watch it normally, because there's just too many, and they're wonderful surprises. That's what makes animation great, and you can tell that it was made by people or a group of animators that thought about every single frame, every single shot in this film. And so now we start to see Geppetto is explaining how he's going to go to school, and Pinocchio, I think it's so interesting, this scene right here where we wake up in the morning, and I want you to guys, if you notice the children. Okay, so we're about to see the children run out, and if you notice that there is a distinction made, these over the top, these overhead sort of bird's eye view shots of the film, they're interesting because if you notice the characters, they're so far away and nondescript. They have this weird way of looking. It's almost like they look like they're a part of a different cartoon, like they don't match. And the reason why, I'm not or my theory, I guess, or what I notice, is that there's a distinction made between Geppetto, Figaro, Jiminy, Cleo, Pinocchio, right? They're more animated. I mean, you could argue it could just be a matter of like saving money, but I think there's also another strange thing happening where the main characters get animated fully, and everyone else, all the other characters, they're almost nondescript. I love this scene where Pinocchio just turns around. Another example of how you can only do that with a puppet. It's a funny, memorable scene just tons of memorable scenes where they've thought of opportunities to add something funny that a puppet could do, right? So, but going back to what I was saying, the characters, all the other characters, kind of it's almost like they don't exist, and it's very weird how you can interpret that. The other characters, like all the other children, their faces don't look fully animated, so they look kind of weird. But at the same time, maybe I don't know what the philosophy of that is. Maybe in this world they don't exist. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I'm like, obviously they do, but it's just weird. It could just be because this. It could just be the story is trying to get us to focus on just them, and it's a great way of doing it. But I just think it's an interesting design choice, and we're going to see that later on as well, where the main characters are fully animated, and the other characters are not. And the kind of the ancillary third, there's a distinction made, and it's weird because it's a representation. I think there's a philosophical meaning that I'm taking from it, which is that in life, it only matters, the people that you interact with are the only ones that matter, right? So people outside, it's almost like they don't really exist because you don't interact with them. And so maybe there's that philosophical, you could interpret it to be that way as well. They don't exist to them, and to us in our world, because we don't know the other characters. So they might as well, they're more nondescript. Now here we see Honest John. Okay, he's following. Now, Honest John and Gideon, or Giddy, I think his name is Gideon. He, like these guys, they really act like it's like a Bugs Bunny episode. And by Bugs Bunny, I mean, the old, I guess, maybe 1940s, 1950s. I don't know exactly. Well, when those types of cartoons where they're just, over exaggerated, doing, ridiculous and physics defying, tricks. And okay, so here's a scene where Honest John is reading a book backwards. Okay, so obviously now that's something that Gaston would do later on. And so I think it's interesting how some of the newer sort of Disney Renaissance movies like Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, as we're going to see, and I'll try to point them out, but I feel like there are some inspirations, between, okay, so we see both of their eyebrows go up, Pinocchio's and Honest John's. But like what I was saying is, there are inspirations. I see a little bit of inspirations from Beauty and the Beast and like Little Mermaid. So that's interesting. And what's interesting as well is that, when he was holding the book, Honest John was holding the book backwards. But I don't think Honest John, in an effort to talk about, to make him seem as if he's not intelligent, but I actually think he is intelligent, because he talks about the theater and, he seems like he is an intelligent man. Like he could be an intelligent person, even though the story is trying to tell us not to. Now, there's something interesting here. So this story, the actor's life, this movie has great music, by the way. And, there is a symbolism between the actor's life and what this represents. Because, Pinocchio was supposed to go to school, but he is, being influenced by the actor's life. And what does that mean? And to me, this represents, it's not just a trickery, because I want to interpret this movie as being also about, this movie is also about, the way I interpret it is that when we look at what it means, how the kinds of sort of the dreams that people have, right? How often do, are young people lured by the promise of fame, right? So it's, so Honest John is really not just, he's not just tricking him, but he's, a person. I think it's actually quite common for young people, and I would include myself in this. When I was young, you want, sometimes you imagine yourself as being famous, and that is intriguing. And sometimes, rather than, go through the hard work, you might feel like, like fame might seem like a get rich quick scheme. And so this, there is that allure. It's not just, I think this represents more than just, Honest John just tricking him into going to the Stromboli cart, but really it's trying to tell a more, a message that applies to us, the audience, a little more. Namely that we are often, as a young person, as young people are often intrigued by the idea of fame. And sometimes you might sacrifice a little too much for it. Now, okay, so here we are, where, Geppetto's talking to him and telling him, hey, you can't go to the theater, okay? You got to go to school. and so Jiminy understands, well, that Pinocchio needs to go to school, but I think this also represents sort of, wisdom, telling Pinocchio that, you should really think about your life. If you're gonna be, and I guess the solution that I would give, if you really do want to chase your dreams, if you want to, because do it in a responsible way, I guess, would probably be the wise way to do it. Cover your bases. Because the reality is, imagine if 1 million people want to be famous, right? Are all 1 million people going to be famous? No, right? Like, the odds of being a famous person is very small, and it's probably not something that you should, that everyone certainly should do without understanding what it is and how unlikely it is, right? Like, and so you want to have a backup plan, and that's kind of what Jiminy and the way I interpret the movie being, or the way I interpret the movie as being able to be interpreted as, or the way that I see the movie. Now, here we're watching Stromboli. This is an interesting thing. Now, we're seeing, this is here's Pinocchio. He's got the spotlight. He's in the limelight. He's stumbling down. Oh, and he fell. And this obviously is an iconic scene. Wonderful animation, just wonderful animation. And these are the moments that I love about this film. But what is really happening here, right? Like, Pinocchio, like, yes, he's getting applauses, right? And he's getting a lot of money. But he's not an actor, right? And not only is he not an actor, he just stumbled. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have this skill. And so, this is reinforcing what I was just talking about. The idea that, you sometimes, especially young people, can have a tendency to want to be famous, but they don't have the skills. Just like Pinocchio. He doesn't have the skills. He's not an actor. And so he really, he can waste his life away like this because he's really not an actor. Now, and you want to be careful, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can put yourself in a sort of prison. And so let's just focus on this. First of all, the animation. We're seeing the animations all from France. Okay, you see these marionettes. There's something very eerie about it, because the marionettes are beautiful, but as we will see later on, or as we're about to see, they're all controlled. They're being controlled by people, by Stromboli or someone else. And so when you think about it, there's something there's something that's scary about the idea that they're alive and they look beautiful, but they're fake. They're not real. They're being moved. And we know that Pinocchio is real, right? To an extent, but these marionettes, there's something, it's tricky. And it's telling us how sometimes the illusions that we have in our mind can seem real, but they're not real at all. And that's really what we're seeing with these marionettes. So there's a symbolism behind this. Now, here we're seeing Pinocchio is getting all of this money, all of these coins, and it seems like it's a victory. And so much so that even Jiminy Cricket himself is, he's reconsidering. He's saying, well, maybe I should leave. And so now here we have Geppetto, and I love how each one of them, once again, the attention to detail that this film has, and how even Cleo gets a little piece of cake or whatever it looks like. And you can see, I love the faces. I love how innocent their faces look, how expressive they are. And I guess in many ways they're meant to be personifications of friends of Geppetto, but really this is a cartoon world, so really we have to take them as actual characters, and you really do see the emotions of Figaro and Cleo. They're extremely endearing without having to talk. So now here we are at Stromboli, and this is an example of how, this film, as we were talking about, sometimes your desires, when you don't plan them correctly, you might not be getting something that benefits you in the long run. So really, when you look at the symbolism, the way I look at it is that sometimes in life, you might feel tempted to follow a dream that is not something that makes sense for you in the long run, right? And sometimes our dreams might get in the way of what is practical in terms of what makes sense, and sometimes we're sacrificing too much for our dreams. Now in the case of this movie, we're seeing Stromboli lock up Pinocchio. Now, obviously, for the purposes of this film, Stromboli is, we're seeing his true form. We're seeing that he is a villain, right? And now we're starting to see what his plans are. So yes, he is going to have Pinocchio performing, but then these performances, he's not getting paid enough for them, right? So he is performing, he is getting that glory of fame, but he's not getting to keep the money. And then when he's finally too old, now this is perhaps the most grim part, but this is where we see where he is actually a villain, right? And so this movie really does, this is a moment in this movie where it takes it seriously, where all of a sudden we're not just talking about we're talking about, it's taking itself seriously. And these moments are moments where you can find the philosophy of life, because life is serious too. And so this film really does, I like those moments. There are things at stake here, because now, you know what, this lifestyle, it's going to, as Stromboli just showed, eventually the marionettes wear out, and then they get used as wood fire, right? And, in other words, this will be the end of Pinocchio, so in the end, there's only so much use that you can have. And so the question becomes, is this really what you want, and is it worth it for you? And in the same way, if you choose to follow a dream, that dream might take up so much of your energy and time that you lose everything. And so you really need to be careful about what you choose to, what dreams you choose to follow. And I really see it that way. Now, here we have Jiminy coming in to say goodbye. And of course, Jiminy, and I love how this film once again brings them together in interesting ways, because you have to give them a reason to do it. So really, Jiminy was doing it just to say goodbye, because he really thought that he would be successful. But then, now they're seeing, that's kind of, I love how the movie gives them sort of a reason for them to be coming back to each other. And we're going to see this again with Geppetto and Pinocchio. And so that's just good storytelling, really. In a good story, every character, there has to be a reason for why they're doing things together. And a good story also gives a good reason for why people stay together and why, things keep happening. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes, or I really like how Geppetto, so it's a night scene, it's raining, and then we see the Stromboli cart bisect and come sort of, it bisects it, it's sort of perpendicular to him. And just a wonderful scene, because Geppetto is kind of moving forward. Another example of how the animators really get creative about how they showcase this film. Now, this right here, I love how, even Geppetto is almost losing hope here, and sometimes in life, even a wise older person, sometimes you do lose hope. Sometimes you can feel like you are in despair, because despair feels like despair. So now we're seeing the Blue Fairy, an apparition from the Blue Fairy, and she is here to offer her consolation. I love this effect where he's sitting backwards and she's kind of backwards. The little moments like that in animation are pleasant. Now, I really like how she questions him, why didn't you go to school? Notice how she takes it seriously, and now here's Pinocchio. Okay, so this is the sort of his main, I think this is what the Pinocchio book, I think this is the main thing where his nose gets bigger as he tells a lie. And I think it's interesting how this film, I don't know how the original book portrays this, but it's interesting to me how this is the only chance when we see Pinocchio's nose grow. And so, but it's still, obviously, this is what the Pinocchio story is known for. And she is telling him that a lie will grow until it's as plain as your face, and you won't be able to stop the lie. And so the lesson here is, I think what she mentioned was truthfulness, bravery, and I can't remember the other one. But But these were attributes that that a good person is going to need, and that's what she's trying to teach Pinocchio. So the blue fairy, representing hope, um, gives them release, and also gives them a peace of mind. So really, sometimes in life, things can seem like they're in despair, but then you get those moments of enlightenment. Now here we see Honest John, and the funny gags, okay, with the donut smoke and Gideon. And this film, in many ways, once again, this film does deal with, there's kind of a subtext that is where you can take it seriously. It takes itself seriously because, in life, so here we have the coachman. Here is where a new villain that we haven't seen. But then once again, we notice how the film shows them as villains. Like all of a sudden, you're watching the film and you might think, well, it's just a cartoon, but really, Walt Disney, I guess he's trying to tell lessons that even grown-ups can also appreciate and learn from. So so you take the story seriously, and that there are lessons to be learned that can apply to everyone, and that's what makes this film great. Okay, so here even Honest John becomes scared of the coachman. And really now there's a new scheme where Honest John is going to try to take Pinocchio to Pleasure Island. Now what's interesting to me is this film, or once again, this film shows all of the the animation. We see Honest John sort of, they're constantly showing sort of these funny little gags. Walt Disney needed to add moments like this because you want to use the medium of the cartoon to show things that you wouldn't normally use in a live action in the same way. So here we have Gideon writing out a recipe or a prescription. Things that seem ridiculous, but when you look at it from a philosophical standpoint, I mean, the reality isn't that how trickeries happen anyway, right? So it's always, life is silly that way too. And perhaps maybe it's not so silly at all, and maybe it's just a different way of representing what happens in life. Now here we are with Honest John giving Pinocchio his ticket to Pleasure Island. Now, to me, when I look at the symbolism of Pleasure Island, and to me, it's kind of similar to, it's a little different from the Fame one that we just saw with Stromboli, because this more represents the effects of wasting your life away. So to me, what this really represents is, let's say, in life you have many ways in which you can find yourself distracted, and you can lose yourself, right? You can waste your life away participating in activities that do not necessarily help you grow. Now Pleasure Island represents when you take it too far, and what happens after that, right? Like you're not going to become successful. Like what and we're going to see that. So here, as I said before, right, we saw Geppetto, and he is the embodiment. We can presume that he was a responsible man, right, to some extent, right? He followed. He must have some level of discipline to be able to have a clean house, an orderly house, to be able to have a career, a successful career, a house full of trinkets, a beautiful home where Pinocchio just saw, and he saw, he doesn't know how that happened, but we as an audience, we can see. And so here we're seeing sort of the opposite, right? We're seeing misbehavior, right? We're seeing and disorderliness. And it's interesting because we're seeing I mean, well, the movie shows Pinocchio, and to me, it almost seems like it wants, Walt Disney really wanted to show sort of the consequences, right? The consequences of, hey, if you act out, there are consequences to it. And it also gives an opportunity to see sort of how even Pinocchio can fall astray, right? And we don't always see that in our main characters, right? So a lot of main characters, they usually tend to be and you still see a little bit of innocence in Pinocchio. You can see that Pinocchio, he in some ways it almost seems like he doesn't know what he's doing, but that doesn't matter. Like maybe it's the environment itself that will change. So even if you don't mean to, right? And a lot of times, what's interesting is that Pinocchio, he doesn't seem to understand always, right? Like I harken back to at the beginning of the movie, when Jiminy was talking to him and trying to explain to him like the temptations and everything, he didn't seem to understand. And so now, sometimes that misunderstanding, might be a part of it, but the reality is it doesn't matter. Like the consequence is still the same, whether you understand it or not. So here we see Lampwick. Okay, so Pinocchio is hanging out with Lampwick, and Lampwick is the only character that we really get to know from Pleasure Island. And Lampwick becomes, well, as we'll see, we get to see. He's the only one that we get to see. Like once again, the same thing that we saw with the school, where the other kids are kind of nondescript. And I love how this movie does that. How this movie kind of focuses really on the characters, and it doesn't really. It makes it very intimate. It feels more real in a way, even though it might seem like it's not, but it is more real, because that's how reality presents itself as well. You don't get to meet everyone you see. When you walk into a room, you don't even pay attention to, most people. You only really pay attention to the people that you interact with directly. So I like that decision, or it's an interesting decision that they made with this film. And here we have Jiminy talking to Pinocchio, explaining to him that he's his conscience. Yep, and Jiminy is walking out. And here we are. This is where we discover how the people are becoming donkeys, right? So people that go to Pleasure Island, they become donkeys. So now, to me, there's a symbolism that goes beyond just the animal transformation. To me, what it's representative of is that as when you partake in whatever activities you do, right, you will become that eventually. So you become what you do. And so if you do things that weaken you, or that turn you into a donkey, well, then you're going to become a donkey. You're going to transform into a donkey. And sort of it is showing the cause and effect. Now, here we see Lampwick, and this is a funny scene because, he talks about the donkey, and we see Pinocchio kind of, he's giving away, he's throwing that away. He's not doing, he doesn't want to do what Lampwick is doing. And it's interesting. It's a funny scene to me because how well designed it is when it matches up. What do I look like? And of course, Pinocchio, he laughs along. It's a great gag that Walt Disney included. And we're seeing them turn into donkeys. And this is actually another scary moment, because we're seeing the realization of we're seeing the consequences of your action coming to life. And that's kind of a scary moment, because a lot of people, they will do an action, but then, they haven't thought about the consequence, what happens. And when they finally realize it, it can be a moment, a very difficult moment psychologically for them. And that's what we're seeing with Lampwick. And in a way, I actually think it's a very intense scene that that should be able to resonate with what happens. Like when you make a decision, decisions that you make, you better be prepared to accept what comes with it, because it will come. So now here we have, this is kind of a transformation. This is Pinocchio deciding, and this is Pinocchio really fulfilling one of the issues that, or one of the things that the Blue Fairy asked for, which is, that he be that he's trying to be a good boy again, right? He's trying to do the right thing. He's realizing that this isn't the way that he wants to go. He doesn't want to do this. Now, here we are with Jiminy. So Jiminy, and I think this is an interesting part of the movie because it's like, well, look, I'm home. We made it. We're done, right? And it feels like this is the ending of the movie. But then Jiminy walks to the side and finds that Geppetto's not there anymore. Now, what this represents as far as Geppetto himself, I think it's interesting. Like, obviously it's sad, but for, in the case of Geppetto, you need to think about how Geppetto was once young too. And that someday, and that, just as Pinocchio goes through struggles, Geppetto is going to go through struggles in life too. And so in this case, Geppetto, we are told by the note that presumably has been sent by the Blue Fairy via the white dove that we just saw. But the thing is, now this is Pinocchio's opportunity to help Pinocchio in his time, or Geppetto in his time in need. So Pinocchio, now that they have read the note, they know that Geppetto has been swallowed by Monstro, the whale, the big whale, and how this is his opportunity for redemption. And really, all of the care and love that Geppetto showed to Pinocchio, and Pinocchio is able to, he wants to help Geppetto in his time in need. So really the whale represents a struggle that Geppetto will have. And it can represent any struggle, I guess, that an adult, that an older person can have. Like disease or financial troubles or whatever, any other issue. Now this right here, this underwater sequence, so they've Geppetto and Pinocchio, they've gone underwater. And to me, this is an interesting scene because I love the animation. And keep in mind that back then, it's the opportunity to see an underwater sequence, just everything about it. I love how the sound effect, the visuals, everything comes together and makes for an interesting cinematic experience if you had seen this in theaters at the time. And I think it's interesting that they thought of, having them wear stones, I guess because he floats, and that's just something that they thought of. I don't think I would have thought of that, but that just shows you the level of detail that they're putting on this. And here's a scene with the big fish and the little fish. That might have been an inspiration for Finding Nemo, maybe. I don't know. Now, what's interesting, okay, these sequences, I want you to pay attention to the fish and how the fish, they look very friendly, right? If you notice, they're colorful, they're friendly, and this just shows you these fish, they're kind of part of the main characters. They're interacting directly with Pinocchio, and so they look colorful, they look friendly. And pay attention to that because, this is a concept that they would adopt with The Little Mermaid. And this sequence to me is kind of an inspiration for The Little Mermaid. It may have served as an inspiration. The fish that we saw and how we saw them all, they look friendly, colorful. They look kind of like Jiminy, right? It's kind of like Jiminy and Figaro. But the way they move, reminiscent to how, or I should say, Little Mermaid took inspiration from this because this came earlier. I see a little bit of Little Mermaid here. And then we're about to see sort of this seahorse sequence again, Ariel, right? In the Little Mermaid, Disney's Little Mermaid, we see how, she plays with the seahorses as well in a similar fashion. And so, to me, I just see, I don't know, they may or may not be relevant, but I really do think there may have been some level of inspiration here. And it just shows you, but of course they do it differently. It's different. And so, when I say inspiration, I don't mean that they do it exactly the same. No, it's a true homage. And once again, the fish following them all, similar to, a lot of these things are similar to how the Little Mermaid might have made them. Now, I want you to pay attention to these fish, and I think they're tuna, because that's what Geppetto calls them. But now I want you to pay attention to the way that the fish are portrayed differently in this scene with Monstro. So where in the old scene, we saw that these fish were colorful, but then in this new scene, we're going to see that the fish look nondescript, similar to the children that were nondescript in the school. And I think that's deliberate as well, because they don't want you to feel sentimental or about the fish that are being eaten by Monstro or by Geppetto. And so there's the distinction made. And I think that's interesting how that was a decision that was made by the filmmakers and the animators. Now here we have Geppetto fishing. So he's been inside the whale for a while, or maybe he never caught enough fish. So he is waiting for Monstro to open his mouth. Now he doesn't. I guess he doesn't know when that will happen, but that's what he's hoping will happen. So here we see this cascade of fish just coming, and again, these are fish. These are fish that are nondescript, so they don't look like the other fishes. They don't have the same friendly faces. Because I guess the movie doesn't want you to become attached to them. And maybe from a philosophical standpoint, maybe there is a difference. But really, I guess the film just doesn't want you to pay attention. But I just think it's interesting how kind of like movie logic. It doesn't make sense, but really it does make sense in the movie context. So here we have Figaro playing or trying to hold down the fish, the tuna. And Pinocchio is swallowed by Monstro. And I think this is an interesting scene because, to be in the belly of the beast, right, there's a lot of there's symbolism behind this, because it shows you that he's kind of in this deep space. Sometimes in Greek, I think it's called katabasis, where the hero is in a sort of at the lowest of the low, and sometimes you go from glory, and sometimes you have to go to the lowest of the low to kind of find yourself and to position yourself so that you can sort of understand what reality is and who you are and your place within it. Now, what's interesting here is, so here we have Pinocchio, and he, at this point, Geppetto has kind of given up on trying to leave. But I think it's interesting. So here we're seeing Pinocchio. He's showing off his tail, and he doesn't quite know how to explain what happened to him, but Geppetto accepts him. Okay, so here we have Geppetto. I mean, this is another funny little gag where Geppetto's trying to get in, and they're trying to get out. And then here we see Pinocchio trying to get someone to open his mouth. Now, what's interesting is, of course, from a storytelling standpoint, we can see that because of the experience that Pinocchio just had at Pleasure Island, he has experience. He understands how to get someone to sneeze or cough. And so I think it's funny how, the movie, gives Pinocchio a reason to know about this. And so this is really just good storytelling, because it matches with what has already happened before. And so when you're making a story, you want to be able to match. You want to have everything happen for a reason. And the more that you can connect things, the better. Okay, so here we have Pinocchio, Geppetto, Cleo, and Figaro trying to get out. And then Geppetto is like, oh, I got to go back out too. And even he was trying to get in. Now they're all getting out. And it's funny. Of course, it's just a funny thing because it gives Geppetto something to do. A decision made by the filmmakers. And really, I mean, at this point, when you think about Monstro, right? Monstro is such a big character. Whenever you have a character that's so larger than life, the character might as well just be sort of a representation of nature or of an idea itself. Maybe Monstro represents life itself. Monstro represents the struggles of life. It represents a great difficulty. It takes on a new meaning, because really, when you think about it, Monstro, right, a monster, right, it doesn't really have, the only thing it's doing is it's just eating things. It's not shown as doing anything else. And so it takes on almost a symbolic meaning within the film. And I think that's intended. So here we see, these are interesting sequences because of how big how big Monstro is meant to be, but also it's interesting to see how the sequence is. It shows, it has to show Monstro sort of from a wide, far away shot. So he seems small and big compared to the large ocean. So really, you're talking about the ocean, the whale, the elements of nature, and that's what Geppetto and Pinocchio are up against. And then there's Monstro crashing into the wall, and a lot of foam. A lot of foam. A very interesting way to animate this. Water. It's interesting how they used to animate water back then. Water is always notoriously hard to animate. Because you don't know if you want to make it see-through or what color to make it. But in this case, it's very foamy, a foamy sea. And here Geppetto spots Pinocchio, and we still don't know what's happened. So now we have Geppetto, and what we've seen here is that Pinocchio fulfilled he had to be brave, right? Honest. He was brave, truthful, and unselfish, right? So he was brave because he went out to see Geppetto, and he was truthful because, in the end, he told Geppetto, right? Or he was truthful to himself, and then he was unselfish. Well, I don't remember when he was truthful, but I'd have to look at that again. But so now, once again, the funny little gag where, Pinocchio, he doesn't realize what has happened. Geppetto doesn't realize, but then in the end, he realizes once again that Pinocchio looks real. Now, Pinocchio is real, and Pinocchio looks kind of different as a real person. Like, in a weird way, I don't know. I kind of wish that they had made him, I don't know, he kind of looked different as a wooden boy. Now he looks different as a real boy, but I don't know. I guess a real boy is not wooden looking. I don't know. So, and, someday, and okay, so now we see the blue fairy, and I feel like this ending, it ends so quickly, and it kind of makes me sad. I kind of wish that we had, more time to see the blue fairy, perhaps. And here we see Pinocchio, or Geppetto, getting the little badge that I think he asked for at the very beginning of the movie. So now he's getting his official conscience, solid gold. And obviously he earned it. I mean, he sings the titular song, the famous, "No request is too extreme. When you wish upon a star, your dreams come true." Right? So I will say that this film to me is, I don't know, it represents a lot of things. As you notice, it's not just a matter of when we see, I wanted to talk about how Pinocchio and Geppetto, Geppetto really is an older version of what Pinocchio will be and what Pinocchio could be someday. And they're interconnected in that way, where Pinocchio was once a child too, and he would have understood the struggles of, or I should say Geppetto was once a child who understood the struggles of what would happen. And then Pinocchio could someday be a grown man. And in a way, Geppetto represents what a successful person could be. And it doesn't have to be, when you look at, for example, Honest John with fame, to me that first temptation is how often people, they want to pursue fame, right? Oftentimes you see young people, and I would include myself when I was young, sometimes you feel that urge to be famous, right? Or to pursue something that is based on seeking fame or following a path that is non-traditional. And the thing is, there is a risk to that. And you need to understand that you could imprison yourself to your own dreams. And to me, that's what that represents. And Stromboli doesn't necessarily have to be a physical sort of villain in your life. It could just be the representation of your own sort of mistaken, or I don't know if you want to call it mistaken, but your own pursuit of your dreams. And you need to understand sort of the consequences and realize, hey, is this really the path that I want to take? Because this could be my imprisonment. If sometimes you might follow a dream and ignore everything else. And, it becomes like an obsession to the point where you are imprisoned. You are you lock yourself up into a cage, and then you need to realize that could be the end of you. Like you're going to be there until, eventually your wood is going to get tired, right? As Stromboli mentioned, right? Eventually your wood is going to get tired, and then, you run out. We all run out of time. And so, in a way, to me, that's kind of representative of how we need to be careful about what we choose to pursue. And at what point do we say, okay, well, we have to make two choices here, right? You either say, I need to prepare properly, right? Because Pinocchio, when you see Pinocchio, he didn't know what he was doing, right? He was stumbling around. So he really wasn't an actor. If he was serious about being an actor, he should have gone, maybe to school or gotten the proper training to eventually become that. And so, to me, that's one way of understanding that. And the next issue that we saw in this movie is the idea of Pleasure Island, and the idea that, if we pursue, sometimes, you might pursue activities that will weaken you. And then the question becomes, once again, you can lose yourself, and you better be willing to accept the consequences of what happens, and you will transform into what it is that you choose. So there are certain things that will turn you into a donkey, and that being sort of symbolic of the idea that you will sort of lose, that you will change as a person. And that not only that, but that also represents lost opportunity, right? Because if you spend too much time in Pleasure Island, you probably will not be a Geppetto. You probably will not be able to create or have the same level of, you may not be able, you might be pay attention to what comes with what you do. And I think sometimes when you don't pay attention to that, or you keep putting something off, it could just be, and it could just be you not, you eschewing or avoiding what you need to be doing in life. And if you avoid it for long enough, eventually the day will come where you'll have to deal with it. Right. And that can be the moment when if you're not prepared, you better be prepared, because in life, it's coming, and what I mean by that is that moment of decision is coming. The moment where you need to act and you need to be prepared, it's coming. And if you're not prepared, and to me, that's, similar to how Lampwick, when he transformed into a donkey, he obviously was not prepared for that. And that's what caused him great consternation. You don't want that to happen to you. So in life, you want to try to prepare so that you will not be caught unprepared. So prepare for what is expected of you in life. Prepare so that someday you're going to have to move out. Someday you're going to have to get things going for yourself. That someday you're going to have to find something to do with your life that is productive and that helps you, that builds you up. And that day will come. And when it comes, you want to be prepared. Because otherwise, if you become a donkey, and there's another issue too as well. The other issue, there's another issue as well that we didn't really talk about, which is the idea of control, and how in life, if you don't prepare properly, then someone else will be in control of your life. You will not be in control. And so it really becomes a matter of, when the donkeys, right? Even though the people who went to Pleasure Island, they had fun, but they lost their control, right? They didn't have control of their lives. And so really, they weren't being paid their due. And so, when you think about it, sometimes it might seem like sometimes it might seem like a path is easy on you, but in reality, if you don't have control of your life, is it really easier? Like maybe you don't have control. You no longer, you're not getting paid what you could have been getting paid. And so that's another thing. Now, so I really did enjoy it. Another thing, and I talked about this a lot, is I really enjoyed the animation of this film. The animation is amazing. It's a kind of film that you could just watch. And I would say this for all of the early Walt Disney films, or the films that Walt Disney himself worked on. And you can really see the attention to detail that they put into it and the decisions for why things were made the way that they were. And I really appreciate it, which is why, these are great films. And, the characters, they're endearing. They're all endearing in their own way. And I also love how the symbolism, I'd be curious, how do you interpret this film? Because I'm pretty sure this film can be interpreted in so many ways. In fact, innumerable ways. Probably so many people, we can all watch this differently and get something out of it according to our own understanding and our place in life and what stage in life we're in. And so, yeah, I'd be curious to see what you think about it and how it speaks to you. So I really enjoyed the characters. In many ways, I'm so curious as to the decisions, as to why they chose to do things the way they did. And with this kind of movie, you can really, you just see it. You see all the decisions, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful art. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for listening, and I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed, I had these thoughts running through my mind, and I wanted to share them. And so I hope you all can find something that speaks to you in this film and in other films as well. And really, that's what art does. It speaks to us. And my hope is that, art is kind of a representation of life. And life can sometimes be hard, and one thing I probably should touch on is the idea of, this film is really, it's about many things, but it's really about when you wish upon a star. It's about a dreamer at the end of the day, okay? And Walt Disney was a dreamer, okay? And he took many risks in his life, and so he rightfully was able to tell this story of how it happens and how, Geppetto was a dreamer, and in the end, even we can see even Pinocchio was a dreamer. I actually see that as well, even though he is portrayed as a boy, but he still had. I feel like you can interpret him as a young. You can insert yourself into that because a lot of what he went through is representative of someone who had dreams, right? Whether it's dreams to become an actor, dreams to dreams to how do you pursue, how do you follow your dreams, and really. When Jiminy Cricket at the beginning of this movie, he, fate is kind, for those, how does the song goes, for their secret longing, which longing means, something that you want. And the reality is there's something, like I said, there's an innocence to Geppetto. And to me, when it comes to being successful and reaching for success, there is a level of honesty that you have to have. And when I say honesty, I mean you need to be honest. You need to do honest work, right? Like you need to provide value no matter what you do. And that necessarily requires a level of sacrifice. And sometimes when you're doing those sacrifices, you're going to find yourself in the belly of the beast. And sometimes that, there are going to be moments, and this is just part of life, that there are going to be moments of uncertainty and moments where it's, things aren't working out the way that you thought they would, even when you do prepare. And so even though, the movie does, you want to be as prepared as you possibly can, but then, even towards the end, notice how Pinocchio, he was making mistakes, right? But then in the end, even Geppetto, who, like as I thought, he had been a responsible person, but then even he, there were times where there were struggles as well for him. And so in a way, that's kind of the ultimate test. And really, it's about having that hope and that optimism and the idea that that hope will carry you through, hopefully, right? And that's one thing that I really appreciate, how the movie shows that even in their times of difficulties, the sort of the idea of the soothing effect of the blue fairy was able to help them, to bring them solace, bring them calmness, but also through that calmness they were able to find their solution. And so, oftentimes in life you might be going through struggles, but really slow down, and when you slow down and reach that calmness, you can find solutions. And so anyway, I hope that this film can inspire you, and I want to thank you for watching. And yeah, tell me what you think. And also, I appreciate you joining me. So thank you.